Hello again. We're back to talk about some philosophy. And in order to get some idea of what Rene Descartes' philosophical points are, let's make a small review about Plato. Now, Plato, as you know from last audio and the posted lecture, has these two realms, the realm called being, B-E-I-N-G, and a realm called becoming, B-E-C-O-M-I-N-G, becoming. These two realms exist at the same time, but they are completely separate. And it is in the realm of being that our soul comes from. Our soul has three parts: a mind, passions, and desires. But while the soul is in the realm of being, it cannot experience passion or desires because a body is required for that. But when the soul, which has identical ideas as other souls, comes into the realm of becoming, which happens through birth, the ideas, the abstract ideas that is, of, say, for example, love, justice, or beauty, which all of us recognize, as you notice, we are not taught these abstract points. We're able to identify examples of love, examples of beauty, and through all time periods, whether we're looking at ancient Greek examples, Egyptians, or Inca examples, many time periods, or just around your neighborhood, you can see beautiful flowers, beautiful sunsets, beautiful sunrises, and we're applying the abstract word beauty to many individual instantiations. So it is the abstract concept which cannot be taught because we have applied it to many different kinds of examples. The point that Plato is making, though, is that these ideas are put into our soul from a different realm. And one of the consequences of this is that our ideas, when we uncover them in the world of becoming, and we are able to harmonize our passion, desires, and reflect upon these ideas, we will have certainty. We will not have doubt as to what an example of love is, or beauty, etc. Now, Descartes appreciates Plato's examples, but he is not going to concern himself with two separate realms. In fact, he concerns himself with only the realm in front of us, which is the realm of matter, which we have right now. But he does agree that our thoughts, just like Plato, are not physical entities. So for Descartes, when he uses the word mind or / soul, he still is of the tradition of a non-physical entity. It's required to have a brain to be able to think, but the brain is not the example of ideas. It is maybe the housing unit for our soul, if you wish to think like that. But, you know, like I said last time, when you crack open a brain and look at all the synaptic currents, you're not going to see the actual thoughts. You're going to just see, like I said, synaptic currents. And for those who want to call that ideas, the problem of logic there is, what exactly are those currents saying? Not saying anything because we don't know what they mean. Well, we know they represent thoughts, but we don't know the actual thoughts that are being expressed with those synaptic currents. Now, for Descartes, he's a rationalist. And a rationalist philosopher is a philosopher who is more concerned with the power of the mind, in this case, the soul, to have intuitive grasp of certainty. So it's not that Descartes will deny the physical world of matter. He agrees matter does exist. In fact, he was a mathematician and a quasi-scientist. But what Descartes is concerned about is that empirical data, which means our sense data that comes to us from our eyes, our nose, our touch, etc., are data which is from the outside world, but our mind, which of course is a separate entity, a non-physical entity, is what is the object which is deciding about our ideas, not, as some contemporary people today believe, that the physical world of data, sense data, is giving us ideas. No, Descartes is still of a tradition that says we are constructing ideas in our mind. Now, to understand Descartes a little bit, as a rationalist, they believe in what's called self-evident ideas. And it's a way of explaining that empirical data, such as statistical analysis, research, polls, don't give us certainty. What gives us certainty is the ability to just think, and the power of the mind by itself will ascertain whether we have true knowledge about what we're talking about. Now, for example, to make this point a little bit more clear, in the lecture that I'm going to post, I have us imagine what a mind might be made out of. Of course, it's not a physical entity for Descartes, so I make an imagery of wood, plastic, or steel. Now, if all people had different kinds of minds, for example, wood, plastic, and steel, we can quickly see that it would be impossible for those who have wood minds to talk to those who have plastic minds. Plastic cannot talk to steel, and etc. There would be no way that we could communicate to each other. It would just be impossible because we're made of different substances. So it's self-evident that all minds are made of the same substance. Now, the word substance here is being used in a non-physical way. We don't really mean that the mind is made out of wood. It's just an imagery to grab hold of the concept that we now know without research, without statistical analysis, without a bunch of brain experiments, that all minds, and of course this is a non-physical thing, will have to be made of the same exact substance. Otherwise, we could not communicate with each other. We couldn't talk. We wouldn't understand what we're saying. But now comes a bit of a problem that Descartes introduces to show us a solution down the line. I'm going to just make a small preview of this example here. Now, if we pretend that our minds are made out of wood, let's just say that's the case. Your mind, mine, your neighbors, your friends, etc. That would mean that our thoughts, by extension, were also made out of wood. There's no doubt about it. Now, in the textbook, there's a selection where Descartes is doubting whether he is awake or asleep. Now, people who are not instructed in philosophy immediately think that's a really silly example because they just look at their hands or they touch something. And they, by doing those examples and others, are relying on the outside world to verify something for certain. They're relying on physical sense data to verify something for certain. However, let's look at this problem a little bit more deep. You can imagine if you were wrapped up so that you couldn't see, you couldn't hear, you were sense deprivation, but you were still awake, you would still be thinking. And you would not know if it's day or night. And you would still be thinking. Now, what is the point of this imagery? The point is that we're always awake in some sense, which would imply that in some sense, we are always doing some kind of thinking. Why am I going to say that we're always awake? Well, because when you are asleep at home or in your vacation and the alarm goes off, if you were dead to the world, you wouldn't hear it. So in some sense, you're awake. You can hear the wind rustling by the windows. So in some sense, we're always awake. Sometimes deep REM that is deep sleep comes. And of course, we are unaware of our surroundings, but it's not like that all the time. So why am I making this point about awake and asleep? Because it's relevant to the problem that I'm going to introduce right now about how do you tell if you're awake or asleep? Let's review now. A few seconds ago, I made the point that if we have a mind out of wood, our thoughts would be made out of wood. Then comes a problem. Then our thoughts, when we're having our eyes open, would also be made out of wood. Likewise, when we're dreaming, that is having funny, silly thoughts, they're also made out of wood. But also, when your eyes are wide open, it's called daydreaming sometimes, you can have funny, silly thoughts also. So having your eyes open or closed is irrelevant to the kind of thoughts that you're having, because like I said, sense deprivation, cover your face up with all kinds of, say, bandages or whatever, you would still be thinking and you wouldn't know if it's day or night. You still have thoughts. So now the question is a logical question. How can I prove beyond a doubt, that the thoughts I'm having while I'm awake are about the real world versus the thoughts while I'm sleeping, I call my dreaming, that those thoughts are the fake thoughts? Or could it be backwards? Could it be that the thoughts while I'm sleeping are the real thoughts, and while I'm awake, those are the fake thoughts? Now, sometimes when people hear this problem, they immediately want to answer by giving sense data examples. For example, like say that they eat food and that proves to them that they're awake. But I can also imagine someone having a dream of eating food, and the brain would have a chemical reaction to that also, even if they were asleep, and you would be having an experience of eating food. Well, the problem here cannot be solved simply by saying sense data proves whether you're awake or asleep, because oftentimes you're walking by a rose bush, you may cut your hand, not even notice it until an hour later, you go, oh my gosh, I cut my hand, right? So there are many things that we can say on either side of the question, whether examples that prove that you're awake or asleep. But that's going to end up going not very far, because the real problem, if now we can review to the main example of ideas made out of wood, listen carefully. If ideas are all made out of wood, that means while we're awake or asleep, they're both wood ideas, awake ones and asleep ones. And the contents of the ideas can be just as silly while we're awake or asleep. Then the logical problem is as follows. There is no distinguishable feature in our minds, in our ideas, to tell us which ideas that we're thinking about are about awake or asleep. Because having our eyes open doesn't prove certainty. Because again, we can be fooled by the sense data, by the world of sense data. Oftentimes you see a stick in the water and it's bent, but in fact it's not, it's just an illusion. Oftentimes you may be driving to Las Vegas and across state line, Nevada, and over there to the right-hand side, it looks like there's a lake in the middle of the afternoon in the summertime, when in fact it's a mirage, right? And of course, you know that now, perhaps, but at first time you may not know that, right? So there are many times when we see sense data and we are misinformed by the sense data. So if we're looking for certainty, Descartes is considering the world of empirical data as not a very reliable source, because occasionally, not every time, we misunderstand the sense data. And that's not anything to do with our minds, it is with the information coming supposedly to us. So what Descartes is trying to tell us with the example of the dreams is that he's not sure how he can tell without a doubt because both ideas are made out of wood, that is, awake ones and asleep ones. In fact, we're continually thinking, as I made a few minutes ago the point. So what this means is that the reader who reads these ideas is called the cogito, C-O-G-I-T-O, cogito. And the cogito is itself a non-physical entity which reads our thoughts. Because the problem again is this: if we have physical matter, as represented by the brain, and our thoughts, which is not matter but non-physical, then what reads our thoughts, which is a cogito, must itself be a non-physical entity inside of a body. Again, but what makes Descartes different than Plato is that the certainty does not come from another realm called being. What makes Descartes of interest is that with the power of the mind, by just self-reflecting upon our thoughts, we will come to complete certainty by ourselves. We will come to complete certainty by ourselves if we follow certain techniques, which he outlines in some of his other books, of how to proceed in thinking properly. And so I think there is a lot more that can be said, but I've talked to you a little bit now about what makes him of interest to us, is that he gives us certainty from the ability of the mind. You know, there is an example in the textbook where there's a burning candle. It's a very famous example. And it has to do with what's called identity, the process of identity, right? You know, when we see people that we haven't met in a long time and recognize them, the bodies have changed, the walk has changed, perhaps they become physically disfigured, and we still recognize them. Well, that shows right there that the physical world of matter doesn't have any particular knowledge inside of it. Somehow, with our thoughts, we are applying our thoughts to the physical world of matter and calling it the same exact object. In the wax candle example, Descartes takes a candle and burns it. And what's famous about this example in favor of Descartes is that you list all the properties that make that candle unique. You might as well list all the properties of your neighbor or your best friend that make them unique. Heaven forbid, but sometime later you never see them again, and maybe their bodies have changed. Something has happened to their physical well-being. Likewise, in the candle, you burn the candle and it puddles on the floor or on a piece of paper. The question Descartes is asking, after you see the candle, is it the same wax that you started with? And of course, the answer is yes. But what you fail to understand is that what you saw in front of your face was 3 distinct chemical changes. The candle in one shape, the melting of the candle, and then the splat. Those are 3 distinct changes right in front of your eyes, as you might see someone change in front of your face, perhaps if you live with someone, or perhaps you might witness a flower is a good example. In fact, an orchid would be a good example. Watch it change. And you'll say, is it the same orchid? Yes, the same orchid. Well, the physical world of matter undergoes constant change. So how can we identify an object as being identical if the physical properties are changing? You see? And this is a very interesting point that all of us seem to overlook when we think about calling something the same. And Descartes' point here is that the power of the mind doesn't get bothered by the physical changes. It calls the same candle it calls the same friend, it's the same guy or same gal, calls them the same, even though physically it's not really the same, right? So the point, as I get ready to adjourn this little audio, by now it's getting quite long, is that philosophically speaking, Descartes has made a pivot from Plato. We now have certainty through the power of our own minds, and it's not dependent upon recollection of any ideas. It's just the power of the mind by itself has the capacity to know things for sure, and it cannot depend upon empirical data, research, statistics, analysis, polls, because they don't prove anything. All they do is give us data, but it's the mind which says it is the same thing. All right, I think we'll stop with that little routine. Hopefully this will help a little bit when you read the posted lecture. And don't forget that when you make the compare and contrast, you quote from the posted lecture and the textbook. All right, thank you.